Hast du schon mal auf Folge? Okay. Ja, herzlich willkommen zu unserer heutigen Vorlesung. Welcome to our next lecture in our lecture series, What is Philosophy? A Critical Polylogue with Philosophers from Africa. Today it is my extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Abosede Ipadeola here, who will present on feminist African philosophy. Dr. Ipadeola is our first fellow of the new Center for Advanced Studies here in Hildesheim for our colleague Forschungsgruppe. And so far, we are very happy to welcome you here in Hildesheim with this lecture, which you will give here in a minute. So, Abosede Ipadeola studied philosophy in Nigeria at the University of Ibadan, where she also was a lecturer of philosophy for about 10 years. Later, she became a fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung and the New Institute in Hamburg, and since November, she is with us here in Hildesheim as our research fellow for our project. Let me just mention two of her latest publications, namely the book Feminist African Philosophy, Woman and the Politics of Difference, published by Routledge in 2023, and her last publication is an article under the title Omoluabi Feminism, Political Leadership Through an African Lens. So what shows or what becomes obvious by the titles of her publications is that she is a specialist in feminist theory, in African philosophy, and also in Black feminist studies, epistemology, ethics, and post-colonial studies. Abosede, we are so happy that you are here, and we are looking forward to your lecture.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My appreciation goes to Professor Anke Granes for inviting me to give this lecture, also Professor Hildesheim, and this magnificent intellectual community. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my thoughts on feminist African philosophy, and also to stand before you this evening. It's an opportunity that I cherish, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you very much for being here. I'm grateful to everyone who is here this evening. So the title of this talk is Feminist African Philosophy, New Issues and Perspectives. As Professor Granes rightly pointed out before while introducing me, I published a work titled Feminist African Philosophy, Women and the Politics of Difference. And while writing the manuscript, I was thinking about different issues. And to be clear, African philosophy is relatively a recent discipline as an academic discipline, not philosophy, not like Africans have not been thinking or reflecting or philosophizing. However, the issue of gender, the issue of feminism, the issue of women's rights, these issues are discussed in African philosophy. That motivated me to write this book. And since this book was published in 2023, I've also been thinking and also been reflecting, and I've come up with some other issues that I did not discuss, and I'm privileged to be here this evening. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to share some new perspectives on this topic with you all. In this presentation, I will explore the intersection of African philosophy and feminist and women's concerns. I firmly believe that a community's philosophy underpins its identity and plays a significant role in defining its place in the world. African people's contributions to global philosophical discourse, viewed from distinctively African perspectives, must adequately address the issue of gender. This I firmly believe. To accomplish this within the framework of African philosophy, my presentation this evening aims to redefine certain key aspects of African philosophy to promote inclusivity and balance. A truly inclusive African philosophy, I believe, is essential for an Africa that genuinely seeks to reclaim its voice and identity. This gives a summary of what I intend to do this evening. So the task before me. So I start. The discourse and practice of feminist philosophy in Africa confronts challenges on multiple fronts. There are questions about what a feminist philosophy within the African context should look like. Whether it would even be necessary to do a feminist philosophy that is uniquely African. Also, there is the issue of, or the question of, the significance of such an endeavor. The discourse at the intersection of feminist philosophy and African philosophy is what I have referred to, and what I refer to as feminist African philosophy. So what is this thing called feminist African philosophy? Feminist African philosophy is an emerging perspective in African philosophy that, on the one hand, critiques African philosophical paradigms, theories, ideas, fundamental beliefs, schemes, and practices that disadvantage African women. Feminist African philosophy asks questions, for example, regarding different moral requirements for men and women on the same moral issues. My book, Feminist African Philosophy, Women and the Politics of Difference, contains copious examples of such moral desiderata. On the one hand, feminist African philosophy also challenges mainstream philosophy regarding how its discourses contribute to the invisibility or marginalization of African men and women and other people of color in traditional philosophy. In other words, feminist African philosophy questions the non-inclusion of African women's experiences in some dominant philosophies, theories, and ideas, and also challenges some explicit biases against Africans and other people of color in Western philosophy. As with the first preoccupation of feminist African philosophy discussed earlier, the first chapter of feminist African philosophy calls out renowned and respected Western scholars whose philosophical ideas were explicitly or impliedly biased against Africans, and how these ideas helped to bolster African people's marginalization. However, beyond critiquing traditional Western philosophy and African philosophy, feminist African philosophy also highlights African women's contributions to philosophy. It examines and accentuates African women's perspectives on morality, reality, knowledge, politics, culture, and other issues of philosophical significance. Mainstreaming African women's philosophical perspectives through the feminist framework is a daunting endeavor that faces stark opposition even from the continent. This is because the theoretical apparatus of feminism is one that has been fiercely opposed by groups of men and even women and scholars from the continent. Subsequently, I will examine some of the objections to feminism in African society and academia. I titled this section Afrocentric Arguments Against Feminism. In many African societies, the question of what feminism is and whether it is appropriate for African women and scholars to identify as feminists has been a subject of intense debate. The word feminism connotes different things in different African contexts. For many, feminism is, among other Eurocentric concepts, a ploy by Euro-American scholars to surreptitiously reintroduce to Africa arguments that underpin the intellectual strand of colonialism. As is popularly known, colonization was a bipartite ideology, and because there was the epistemological, I did not say epistemological, that is epistemology and logic. Epistemological or intellectual aspects that underpin the practical stand or actual colonization. Scholars and African people who are generally suspicious of Euro-American concepts and ideas cannot be blamed or accused of being paranoid. If one considers the historical culmination of colonialism, one will realize that pernicious ideologies and concepts sometimes come or are introduced wearing a garb of altruism. For example, one of the arguments offered before the introduction of colonialism was that it was imperative to introduce the scheme as an altruistic alternative to slavery, which at the time had become unpopular, and the agitation for its abolition was spreading like wildfire in Europe and America. Therefore, some African scholars argue that an intellectual tradition that produced scholars like Levi-Bru, Arthur de Gobineau, Johannes Blumenbach, G.W.F. Hegel, Immanuel Kant, and John Locke, with their disparaging comments about Africa and the categorization of African people as inferior, cannot be trusted to help Africans address their contemporary challenges. On this note, feminism has not received acceptance from many Africans as a catalyst for engendering the social change required to drive the growth and development of the African continent. Another reason why some Africans and African scholars find feminism repulsive is that it is considered to be a violent ideology that is aimed at disrupting societal order, harmonious family coexistence, and social cohesion. For many people, feminists are aggressive. As you can see here, this is the picture that comes to mind when you talk about feminism in Africa. Many people just tell, oh, they're always ready to fight. They're so aggressive. So for many people, feminists are aggressive, miserable, unhappy women who are generally misandrists. Consequently, the relevance of feminism has remained contested within African contexts. In many African societies, marriage is believed to be the zenith of a woman's achievements. No matter how successful a woman is or the heights she attains in the public sphere, if her marriage fails, she's believed to have utterly failed. For example, The Yoruba say, obìnrin sọ ìwà nù, ó lóun ò mórí ọkọ wáyé. That's my mother tongue anyway, so I know that must have sounded like, what did she say? Yes, I'll translate. It says, a woman who lacks good character often tends to blame her failed marriage on fate. Hence, girls are trained right from childhood to be well-behaved, to be patient and long-suffering, to be good cooks, and to be good homemakers. It is popularly believed that feminism challenges these age-old ideals that have been the secret of harmony in families and society for a long time. Hence, many Africans are opposed to feminism for fear that it could erode the foundation of peace and harmony in families and society. The most popular narrative among scholars is the argument that patriarchy and gender disparity are alien to Africa or to African societies. According to some African gender scholars, women and men wielded equal political and spiritual powers in pre-colonial African societies. In pristine African societies, according to those scholars, people were not discriminated against or mistreated because they were men or women. It is contended that the gender dynamics in Africa were considerably altered by colonial disruption. Following the imposition of Victorian gender relations that the colonizers were familiar with and which they introduced to Africa during their colonial expedition. Therefore, it is contended that gender disparity is a fallout of colonization, and it was non-existent in pre-colonial African societies. Such lines of thought, therefore, bolster the argument that feminism has nothing to offer Africans, since it is analogous to buying medicine from the one who infected one with the disease. However, a critical evaluation of each of these arguments against feminism highlighted above reveals that many of the arguments are spurious, specious, and steeped in insincerity and the lack of commitment to gender egalitarianism. For instance, the first argument against feminism that advocates for its rejection simply because it is foreign is isolationist, and hence not helpful for the cause of addressing our challenges as contemporary Africans. This argument is obviously founded on the erroneous assumption that it is feasible or realistic for world regions to isolate themselves in their bid to address their socio-political problems. Historically, this has been found to be counterproductive. This is not to exonerate the colonizers, please note this carefully, or trivialize the harm that colonization brought upon Africa. Nevertheless, the recommendation that the baby be thrown away with the bathwater is an inexpedient proposal and an ill wind that blows nobody any good. What is required for contemporary Africa to move forward is to critically examine theories. Whether they are homegrown or imported, it makes little difference, as long as they are carefully and calculatedly adopted, and they are found to be adequately effective and pragmatic to address a local challenge. In this particular case, jettisoning feminism without considering its merits or checking to see if indeed the problem that the concept confronts exists in Africa is problematic and unhelpful. In this age, when the world has metaphorically shrunk, so much so that whatever happens in one part of the globe reverberates and rapidly affects distant places on the other side of the hemisphere, an isolationist ideology is apparently not in anyone's interest. Also, the narrative that colonialism is solely responsible for gender disparity in contemporary African societies is one that cannot be substantiated. To be clear, colonialism aggravated the gender disparity situation in Africa because of the nature of colonial imposition that required the support of Africa's autochthonous patriarchy to function. Hence, while the colonizers did not necessarily introduce patriarchy to Africa, they toughened and institutionalized it to make it work for them. Therefore, the claim that colonization fostered gender inequality on African societies, where before the advent of colonialism, women and men were literally on the same socio-political and socio-economic pedestal, flies in the face of evidence. Those who argue that gender inequality is an invention of the colonizers need to explain why some historical evidence, sayings, and traditional practices suggest otherwise. For example, it is not far to seek that many pre-colonial African political systems were predominantly gendered. Colonialism only leveraged the political structures already in place to perpetuate gender disparities. Examples of how colonial spaces were gendered in traditional African societies can be obtained from archival and historical sources. The claim that Africa's pre-colonial societies were impeccably egalitarian is difficult to corroborate with historical evidence. To be sure, there were a few matrilineal and metrocentric pre-colonial African societies. These few exceptions do not provide enough basis to make the general claim that African pre-colonial societies were fundamentally egalitarian in gender issues. The danger of denying a problem is that it is left unaddressed, and this elongates its lifespan. If the definition of feminism given by the iconic Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks is anything to go by, feminism is for everyone, including Africans. The argument that feminism should be rejected because feminists are misandrists is also a dubious one. This is because feminists are not living in their own world. They are girls and women who have boys and men in their lives as fathers, spouses, brothers, uncles, cousins, sons, grandsons, colleagues, neighbors, and friends whom they truly care about. Moreover, if a woman is indeed a misandrist, this does not make her a feminist. My definition of feminism, which I will examine later, puts the issue of what feminism wants in perspective. Finally, the claim that feminism is a violent idea that should be discouraged in order to have peace in society is also a problematic one. To put the argument against feminism because of feminist aggressiveness in proper perspective, I compared fatalities as a result of electoral violence against fatalities as a result of aggressive feminism, if there's anything like that. While thousands have died across the continent because of electoral violence in the last couple of decades. There is no known single reported case of any death as a result of aggressive feminism. Nevertheless, no one who respects liberty, equality, and human rights would attack democracy or argue that the political system be abandoned because of the fatalities. Even in Africa, when the dust has settled after a spate of such violence, we only admit that we need to reevaluate our democratic values and work to forestall future recurrences. At other times, we claim that our nascent democracy requires time to evolve or to properly develop. We do not recommend that democracy be rejected on account of the fatalities and homicides that are recorded in nearly every election season. The question is, why don't we extend the same grace and understanding to feminism that has so far been responsible for zero fatalities, even if we claim that some feminists are aggressive? That being said, I think another problem with feminism in Africa or in the African context stems from the fact that many people do not have a working definition of the concept. So, what is feminism? Bellux defines feminism as a movement. Bellux defines feminism as a movement to end sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. In a classic book, feminist book, Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics. My definition of feminism is similar. In my view, feminism refers to an advocacy or perspective focused on achieving egalitarianism and justice in gender relations. It is also an effort to eradicate prejudices and stereotypes that bolster women's mistreatment as the inferior order, and therefore justify the marginalization and oppression that they suffer just because they are female. Taking a critical look at the meanings of feminism above, I do not see why or how feminism should be considered to be antithetical to an ideal African way of life or culture. Therefore, the argument that some other woman-friendly or African-friendly concepts should be adopted but not feminism is unfounded. Consequently, African women's expression of their agency through their philosophy is not inconsistent or incompatible with feminism. The question is, how have African women been expressing their agency even in the face of patriarchal opposition? I will address this question by exploring two examples of what I call African women's domain of agency. I titled this African Women's Domain of Agency and Positional Philosophy. Positional philosophy refers to a holistic view of philosophy that is not focused on a philosophical idea or the practice of philosophy alone, but that which also takes cognizance of the context of a philosophical idea. In other words, positional philosophy studies a philosophical idea in relation to the milieu in which it is produced. Positional philosophy holds that to properly understand an idea, it is equally crucial to understand the context within which it is generated. Positional philosophy does not study context to to highlight positionalities or to underscore positionalities of vulnerability and marginalization. Rather, it considers background as a vital part of an idea, or that it is crucial for properly understanding a philosophical idea. Whether the idea is about power, privilege, oppression, marginalization, or anything else, it is crucial to look at the background or the environment, the position. Positional philosophy also examines the role that an epistemic agent plays in knowledge production, co-production, dissemination, justification, and evaluation, or the role that a moral agent plays in the formulation and normativization of ethical concepts. I will discuss two African women's positional philosophies to highlight African women's contributions to philosophy and the spaces in which they get this done. The first positional philosophy highlights African women's philosophical methodology of critical storytelling. In recent times, I've been thinking about how philosophical storytelling has been a source of empowerment and expression of agency for African women since antiquity. Women across African societies exercise their agency through storytelling despite patriarchy's attempt to suppress and silence them. Critical storytelling is not a recent method of philosophy in Africa. It has been a consistently used pedagogical and philosophical tool that African women have employed to pass across their philosophical ideas and perspectives for centuries. Previous attempts to define African philosophy have either ignored or de-emphasized the significance of the methodology of critical storytelling. However, critical storytelling is not only an age-old philosophical method, but it is also a feminist method because it is gender inclusive and helps women articulate their philosophical perspectives. Critical storytelling has been so overlooked in African philosophy that it is either subsumed under ethnophilosophy or it is erased altogether. This is why when Henry Odera Aruka argued that African philosophy resides or can be found with original thinkers in African rural areas, he did not consider storytelling as an important method of African philosophy. Rather, he adopted the Socratic method to discover African thinkers who are intellectually comparable to Socrates, Descartes, Kant, and other brilliant Western philosophers. The outcome of that research is also strikingly similar to Socrates. In the two instances, women are silenced or rendered invisible. Socrates, for example, had conversations with numerous male interlocutors like Crito, Euthyphro, Theaetetus, Thrasymachus, Glaucon, Meno, and many others, as against only two women, Aspasia and Diotima. Identically, when the Socratic method was employed in the African context, it generated the same result, such that while Oruka spoke with more than 5 men, he recorded his conversation with only a lone female voice called Perish, whom he categorized as a folk sage and not a philosophic sage. The categorization is a testament to her incompetence as a philosopher who could be placed on the same philosophical pedestal as Socrates, Locke, Plato, or Hegel. With the critical storytelling method, however, women's voices are amplified rather than silenced or lowered. To put the method of critical storytelling in perspective, I'll focus on the use of the methodology among the Yoruba. Yoruba people are found across West Africa, predominantly in Nigeria as well as in Benin, Sierra Leone, and Togo. Their language, culture, and traditional religions contain elements of their indigenous philosophical ideas. Critical storytelling is a method that the Yoruba have adopted for centuries, both to do and to teach and learn philosophy. This is a method of philosophy that ensures inclusion and opposes marginalization or silencing of voices. This method transcends gender, class, and age divides to foster inclusion. Critical storytelling is the narrative method that is used to include every perspective in a storytelling, pedagogical, and knowledge production situation. This approach encourages narrators and listeners to consider various perspectives and to recognize the existence of alternative narratives that may have been silenced or overlooked. This method of storytelling is an important philosophical method and pedagogical tool that African people's ancestors have used for several centuries. Storytelling empowers men, women, individuals, and communities to make their perspectives known and contribute to the repositories of knowledge available to a community. Storytelling is a tool for knowledge co-production and evaluation. After dinner in a typical Yoruba pre-colonial family that comprises parents, siblings, nibblings, grandparents, neighbors, and friends, we don't make all these distinctions. Anyways, so people, both young and old, sit in circles just like this to listen to stories called Alo. There are two types of Alo among the Yoruba, and these are Alo Apagbe and Alo Apamu. Literally, Alo Apagbe means that when a story is told, the narrator sings a song that the listeners sing along to or echo. Apamu, on the other hand, is founded on making knowledge-based discoveries through critical thinking or formal logic. After telling a story, the narrator encourages everyone to think and highlight the lessons derived from the story. Through the highlights, Alo Apagbe is used to teach and learn different aspects of philosophy, such as ethics, epistemology, philosophy of language, political philosophy, and metaphysics. Alo Apamu, on the other hand, is told as a riddle or puzzle. The narrator provides clues and answers as sought. This method of African philosophy is similar to symbolic logic in Western philosophy, but it is not patterned after Western symbolic logic or subject to its rules. Although this way of doing philosophy encourages independent thinking, it also prioritizes working together to support one another in the pursuit of knowledge. Therefore, both Alo Apagbe and Alo Apamu involve knowledge co-production. An important feature of the method of critical storytelling is that it does not restrict philosophy to the ivory towers alone. The hubris of viewing philosophy as an activity limited to the four walls of a university underpins the racial, gender, and class segregation and marginalization that are observable in traditional Western philosophy. This underpins the denial of philosophy's ubiquitousness by some Western philosophers. Critical storytelling encourages inclusion by allowing and encouraging everyone to tell their story, hence their philosophy, in their own voice. However, the feature of criticality serves as the guiding principle to ensure that the story or storytelling remains within the ambit of philosophy. Nevertheless, the feature of Okay, nevertheless, the feature of criticality must also avoid undue impositions or stifling of perspectives. Therefore, to further understand women, particularly African women's philosophical perspectives, it is imperative to listen to their stories. Please, I need one second to bring on board my. I'm sorry. So, now, another African women's positional philosophy is practice through nurturing. In this instance, also, my focus is on a philosophical practice that is popular among Yoruba women, but which has also been popularly practiced among other ethnic groups in Africa since antiquity. I intend to highlight this practice among Yoruba women because, on the one hand, I do not assume that Africa is a homogeneous unit of analysis where any one belief or practice is true for every region or community across the continent. However, although I acknowledge that there are fundamental, significant cultural nuances that cannot be trivialized, nevertheless, there are significant and common beliefs and practices that are perhaps outcomes of many centuries of philosophical reflections and conceptual evaluations, and certain similarities are also sometimes due to the fact that many of the people across the continent have lived close to one another for ages. Additionally, I'm focusing on the Yoruba in order to contextualize my discussion of the feminist or feminine philosophical practice in question. In a recent publication, the publication that Professor Granes alluded to earlier, I discussed some feminine virtues that women have developed but which have been mostly overlooked as their unique and important contributions to African philosophy. In my question of the qualities of Omoluabi, which refers to a virtuous person among the Yoruba, I noted that Omoluabi, which was supposed to be gender neutral, has been heavily masculinized, judging from its well-known qualities. To address the misconception that Omoluabi is essentially masculine, I proposed some additional virtues that, when added to the existing ones, will make the Omoluabi concept more comprehensive, gender balanced, and inclusive. I noted that a balanced theory of Omoluabi could be employed to address many of the challenges associated with the crisis of leadership in Africa. Today, however, my discussion is focused on the context in which the virtues are developed rather than the virtues themselves. This is because the context is a domain of agency for African women. They have been philosophizing in this domain of agency for so long that it has become more important than ever before to pay attention to what goes on in this context if we must understand African women's feminist philosophy. In Yoruba women's domain of agency, certain virtues are developed that are not essentially tied to femininity, but are developed as a result of their roles as nurturers and caregivers. It is crucial to note that feminine roles are not always oppressive. A feminine role becomes oppressive only when it is foisted on women simply because they are women. However, when a feminine role is performed within women's domain of agency, it does not negate their autonomy and rights as women. Olojojomo is a domain of agency where Yoruba women develop the virtues of duty, which is called ojúṣe, nurture, which is itoju, resilience, which is called the fayaro, and improvisation, which is called ogun atinuda, which are all ethical virtues that have enabled African women to navigate the maternal and feminist spaces over the centuries. Among Yoruba women, Olojujomo refers to the postpartum care scheme. It is also well known in many other African societies, such as the Igbo society, Igbo among the Igbo, where it is called Omugo, among the Gala society, or among the Gala, where it is known as Iwagwala Oma. Olojujomo is a family-based support that a new mother and a newborn receive from an elderly female member of the family, which is commonly provided by a new mom's mother-in-law, mother, aunt, great aunt, neighbor, or older friend. Olojujomo is a Yoruba term that means the act of nurturing a child or children. It refers to the role of women as mothers, nurturers, educators, and protectors of children in the family and the community. Olojujomo is a manifestation of the feminine virtue of duty, which entails fulfilling one's obligation and responsibilities to others, especially those who are vulnerable and dependent. This care method has been practiced by African women for centuries, but it is still one of the least studied practices that demonstrate the strength, agency, and resilience of African women. When a woman delivers a baby, her mother-in-law or her own mother, if the former is unavailable, or any older female member of the family moves in to take care of the new baby and the new mother. The older woman considers it her duty to take care of the new mom and baby without expecting any payment or reward for this care. She does it because she feels obliged to do so. This practice ensures that the new mother receives the necessary physical, emotional, and practical support to facilitate a rapid recovery and the healthy development of her baby. This practice has benefited generations of Yoruba or African women, both as recipients and providers of care. The philosophy behind this is the sense of duty that drives the practice. Whereas duty is regarded as a masculine attribute, or in Western ethics, it is a feminine quality among the Yoruba, as envisioned by the sense of duty that has propelled the practice of Olojujomo for centuries. And the practice still persists and thrives today. Olojujomo is also a source of empowerment and dignity for women as they contribute to the social and moral development of society through their care for children and children's children. Olojujomo is a practice that reflects the Yoruba worldview and that values interdependence, reciprocity, and cooperation. The virtue of nurturing also manifests through a woman's life, regardless of whether she's a mother or not. The responsibility to nurture is a role that African women have performed for generations, not only for their own children, but also for other members of their families and communities. Being nurturers and caregivers has enabled many African women to assert their agency and strength in various spheres of life. They have used their nurturing skills to support, educate, empower, and protect others, and to contribute to the social and economic development of their societies. I argue in my paper on the feminine, in that paper on the feminine virtues of Omoluabi, that nurture is a virtue that can help political leaders care for the welfare and interests of their citizens and constituents and create a fair and inclusive society. Seeing themselves as naturals would also enable political leaders to foster dialogue and consensus among different political parties and groups, and to respect diversity and human rights. This will also make them adapt to global and local challenges and opportunities and be visionary and innovative in their policies and strategies. The practice of Olojojomo involves singing songs and chanting the family's panegyrics, which has also become the new baby's panegyrics, that is, Oriki. Apart from acquiring and teaching moral values and virtues, Olojojomo also provides an environment to critically reflect on the virtues. It is also a realm where women develop and teach their epistemic perspectives. Examples of songs that women sing in the context of Olojojomo are the following. And at this juncture, I would like to bring in my co-presenter. I have a co-presenter this evening. I did not tell you about this. My co-presenter is not here, but her voice is here. She's about 7,000 miles away. But this is my co-presenter. This is my mom and her grandchildren, my nephews. So I'll play some of the songs that are sung while within this domain of agency shortly. So the next voice you're going to hear is my co-presenter's voice.
Aṣọ ilé tí mo rà, ọmọ ni ó jogún o, iṣẹ́ ọwọ́ mi. Ọmọ ni ó jogún o, aṣọ ilé tí mo rà, ọmọ ni ó jogún o, iṣẹ́ ọwọ́ mi.
This is how we dance while singing the song.
Bí mo ṣe ń sọ wá gẹ́gẹ́, tèmi yé mi. Tèmi yé mi, ò tèmi yé mi. Bí mo ṣe ń sọ wá gẹ́gẹ́, tèmi yé mi. Bí sùn ọmọ bá jiná, kó má má jó mi lẹ́nu. Báyà ọmọ bá wọlé, kó má má lé mi jáde. Bí mo ṣe ń sọ wá gẹ́gẹ́, tèmi yé mi. Bí mo ṣe ń sọ wá gẹ́gẹ́, tèmi yé mi.
So thank you very much. Yeah, so just everything she has said, I've tried to translate, not word by word, but just to give you what she has been talking about. Thank you very much. So the philosophical significance of the songs sung by Yoruba women during postpartum care, as well as in their care for the young, the elderly, the infirm, and themselves, lies in their ability to articulate and express their thoughts on various philosophical issues. These songs address topics such as morality, reality, common sense, knowledge, existence, and spirituality, among others. Now, as I conclude, African women's philosophical perspectives has been the most unknown and most understudied in philosophy. The importance of feminist African philosophy is to argue that those perspectives do exist, and by highlighting them, as I have done by discussing two of African women's positional philosophical domains this evening. There's still so much to do to mainstream African women. There's still so much to do to mainstream African women's philosophical perspectives in both African philosophy and global philosophy. However, it is heartwarming that African women are getting motivated to make these perspectives known in order to bring them from the fringes to the center in the philosophical landscape. African women's voices are still not loud enough, but we have always been speaking. And on that note, I would like to say thank you very much for listening to an African woman philosopher's voice this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abosede, for your lecture and introducing Yoruba terms, Yoruba traditions, and trying to exploit them as philosophical practices. So I think there is a lot of food for thought here, and the floor is now open for the question and answer session. So please ask your questions, give some comments. The floor is open. Und wie immer, Sie können Ihre Fragen natürlich auch auf Deutsch stellen oder Ihre Kommentare und wir versuchen das dann eben dementsprechend zu übersetzen. Also fühlen Sie sich oder fühlt ihr euch frei, die Sprache zu wählen, mit der ihr sprechen wollt. Bitte schön. So.
So thank you, Abosede, for a wonderful lecture. I have just maybe one question to start with, some just understanding what this critical storytelling, how can we understand that? So you said it is a gender inclusive practice of philosophizing, and it is, did I understand it correctly, that it is led by a woman philosopher, so it's a woman led practice, or also it can be done also by male philosophers, and how is this kind of gender inclusiveness to be understand correctly in our terms? So just trying to understand more accurately.
Thank you very much for that very important question. Yes, critical storytelling, as I already mentioned while presenting the paper, is about bringing people together to tell a story, or tell stories, their stories, in a way that gives everybody a sense of belonging within the group, that makes everyone to be encouraged to share their perspectives, to talk about, to tell their own stories, to narrate their stories using their own voices. So it's not exclusively for women, it's for women, for men, for young people, for children, for everybody. So that is why for me, critical storytelling is a very important method of philosophy, because it is not exclusively for, it does not exclude, and it is not exclusively for women or for a particular group. It's for everyone. And storytelling is an ancient method, is an age-old method of passing information across. Our ancestors, our distant ancestors have been using this method for ages to tell us what happened, and the stories have continued. The stories have been evolving. It's only unfortunate that now because of this, because textuality is rated above morality now in many intellectual circles, it is believed that if it's not written down, it is not authentic, it is not valid, it is not something that we should pay attention to. But our ancestors started by telling stories, and it may interest you to just note that even the way we think, we think by forming stories in our mind, in our heads or mind or hearts, wherever. That is the way we think. When we think, we do not think in, maybe not many of us do that, like creating a chart or figures or statistics. We think by putting stories together. When we meet anyone for the first time, for example, we have a story to tell. The impression that the person gives has already put something within us to have a story. We put all these stories together, and that is why people say, yes, I'm comfortable with this person, I'm not comfortable with this other person, I like being here. It's because of stories that we have told ourselves. So stories are with us every day. Stories are with us every time. Why not use it as a philosophical method? Because it is really a philosophical method. As I pointed out, women bring children together, even African men too. They sit with them. They come together. They tell stories. They evaluate those stories. That is where it becomes. It stimulates critical thinking. It helps to stimulate critical thinking. It's not just about dumping off. It's not just about giving out ideas, forcing or coercing people to adopt some perspectives. It's about also reflecting, thinking for themselves. So, like Prof said when I mentioned this the other time, that it is not dogmatic. It's not dogmatic. It encourages it. The purpose of the setting of bringing people together to tell stories in this particular context is to encourage everybody to evaluate those stories, to reflect on those stories, to justify their positions if there are any, and so on. So
This was a great answer for
thank you for asking.
Are there
Yeah.
further questions? Bitteschön.
I hope it's fine to ask a rather longer question, or maybe it's even two questions. At first, I'd like to ask, or to say thank you very much for the lesson.
Thank you.
But I'm very much interested in the space where this critical storytelling takes place, because I see it as a way of building community, but also making a community possible where people see each other like as a human being, as who they are. But here we face the problem of every room being put under like the capitalist measures. So like I have to afford to have a room, to have this community and to have this conversation. So I feel like in Hildesheim, one of the first steps for a community, like to even create a critical like conversation, we at first need to make sure that there's a place, but we don't have the money for that. So there are very much like ausgeliefert. We need resources like the university to give those spaces to us. So the first question is like, are there similar problems in like cities like Lagos, which is like a giant city and room is really something important and people need to afford it to have this way of speaking to each other. Do you face similar problems, or do you have maybe even like steps you already take in your communities to face this problem? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that brilliant question. Absolutely, I agree with you. We need to have some space. But then my ancestors say, I'll say it the way they say it, then I'll translate. They say, Inú ògbà, láyé ògbà. What this means is, when we are clamoring for more space than no. Sometimes it's because we feel that it has to be something elaborate or something so big. It doesn't always have to be. Whatever we have, we could make do with what we have as long as we are united. As long as what this means is what I'm trying to say really is that the kind of community that we're looking for is best first built in our hearts. In this particular in this particular context means our hearts, the state of our hearts. So when we feel like we belong together, it becomes really easy to bring people together, even if we don't have so much, even we don't have so much space. Yeah. And do we have this same problem in Lagos? Lagos is a big city. It's a very big city where you have different people going about. Yes, we also have that, and we do not have that. In some contexts, we do. In some situations, we do not. We don't have that. Not in every situation, right, really. But the first thing is to build that community within us, to accept that we really need to have this community. That would make it easy to bring people together, even if we don't have a large place to assemble people. It would be easy to bring everybody together and maximize whatever is available. Have I answered your question?
Yes, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Are there further questions? Otherwise, I have a long list of questions. So I would use my chance here to ask some questions. So the title of our lecture series is "What is Philosophy?" So now you introduce certain practices, mainly practices of African women, or let's put it more in the context where you are speaking from, Yoruba women, not all African women, but Yoruba women. And you introduce these practices as philosophical practices. So what is philosophy? What is philosophy for you? How would you try to explain what you understand by philosophy? And maybe also two further questions, namely, what do you think is the yardstick to measure something or to explain or to denote something as philosophy? And since you had your co-presenter here, is your mother a philosopher?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Prof, for those really tough questions. I'll try to address them. Now, what is philosophy? Unfortunately, whenever we meet new people coming to study philosophy, I remember that our philosophy 101 classes, it's always a time. The first thing we tell them is that you are coming to study a discipline that unfortunately it does not have one definition that every philosopher agrees to. We don't have the definition of philosophy. But for me, so that makes it a bit easier. I believe that has taken away the burden from me to give a precise definition. I think. Now, so for me, I always look at philosophy through its branches. That is epistemology, which talks about knowledge, not just producing knowledge, but also justifying what makes that a knowledge claim. Metaphysics, which talks about reality, because and also logic, which talks about reasoning, and ethics, which talks about morality, and some other smaller branches. Because I believe that it is precise enough to define philosophy that way, and and at the same time it is broad enough. Because if we give a particular definition, that then the reason why I prefer this approach to defining philosophy is that if we say, okay, it's about knowledge and it is justified within the context where we're looking at, within the context that we're considering, that we're looking at, maybe a particular cultural context, then we give them the opportunity, or we allow them to define knowledge, to define their epistemology within their context. There are no impositions. There is no. We are not using our paradigm or our yardstick as the standard to look at what they are doing, because I think that any other way, by imposing one dominant perspective and looking down on some other perspectives from the places that are not so dominant, we run the risk of ending up with a philosophy that is too narrow. So I make it broad, but not too broad. I make it broad by throwing it open that, okay, let's talk about all these main concepts: knowledge, reality, morality, and reason or argument, as the case may be, or common sense, to bring it down, common sense. So these are defined within the philosophical tradition in question. It's not necessarily that this has to be the way it's looked at. So that is the way I have been looking at philosophy, and I don't know, does it answer your question?
It's one approach.
It's one approach. There are different approaches. But
yeah. So is your mother a philosopher?
Yes. I think a philosopher does not necessarily have to be somebody trained, somebody like me. In her own right, I believe she's a philosopher, because she also reflects on these issues that philosophers talk about, but she does not use the methodology or the methods that we adopt, or the way we do it as trained philosophers, especially trained people who have been trained under the Western philosophical tradition. But in her own right, I believe she is a philosopher, because she talks about this, and there are so many other women, millions, billions of other women who are also philosophers, who do not come to places like this to teach philosophy.
Yeah, thank you for this answer. And actually, your answer is standing in a good tradition, because Odera Uruka, Henry Odera Uruka, is a Kenyan philosopher who you just criticized here, and who is the founder of the Sage Philosophy Project, one of the big traditions in 20th century African philosophy. He also interviewed his father, Ranginya Uruka,
Wow.
and he also took him as a philosopher, as a philosophic sage. Yeah. Okay, I have the privilege that I can ask all my questions tomorrow and all the other days and discuss it with Abosede Ipadeola, but you have the chance now here. So, Jule, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I learned a lot, and I'm happy to discuss more with you tomorrow. I have two questions. First of all, thank you very much for reminding us with bell hooks that feminism is for everyone, and that it's an egalitarian political project. And I know it's a very long debate in feminism, starting with Black feminism, but how to think feminism as an egalitarian project without denying difference, or how to think equality while recognizing differences. I know it's a long debate, but I would really be interested in your answer. And then I have a second question, because when you introduced your mother, the co-presentator and philosopher, you made you had on your PowerPoint 3 points, that in this practices of nurturing, there were reflections on children and inheritance, but also reflections on how children would mirror of the mothers and how this is linked to metaphysics. And could you elaborate on that? I didn't understand it right.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Yes, what I think currently, feminists, we one way for feminists to address the problem of inclusion and egalitarianism without encouraging marginalization and erasure and what have you, is that I believe one way of doing that is to constantly remind ourselves that what gave rise to feminism itself as a movement, as a movement, as an academic discipline, is to challenge patriarchy, to challenge exclusion, to challenge marginalization. So I think it is important to constantly remind ourselves when we see that a section is left behind, a group is left behind, a group is marginalized, it is our responsibility as feminists to point it out. Yeah, I think that is a way. Maybe not the only way, maybe not the best way to do it, but I think, yeah. Thank you. And also talking about children and as a child as a mirror, I liken that to the problem of personal identity in Western metaphysics, because some women, they see themselves through their children. So one of the songs that I didn't get that my co-presenter sang talks about this. So I believe they must have come up with that. Whoever composed the song must have come up with it after looking at those children and thinking that, in a way, they mirror the parents. Yeah, just one of the issues, but not everything. And that does not mean that when somebody does not have children, then the person is does not exist, or things like no, that doesn't. No, we don't have that, because we have this. We have in every community. We do not differentiate. Like, interestingly, I read a post, a social media post a while ago, and the person said the writer of the post is also, the writer of the post was talking about when in Africa you call, or in Nigeria, for example, you call mommy and like 5 women turn that because you don't. So the person was saying, and this is true, that sometimes you just have to say, oh no, not you, ma, mommy. So you now have another, maybe where the person lives, to show that I'm actually addressing this mommy, not this other mommy. So everybody is a mom, everybody is a child, everybody is your sister, everybody is a brother, everybody is everything to everybody. Thank you.
It can also be confusing. Huh?
Yes.
Okay, there's a question by Lara.
Yeah, Abosede, I'm so happy that you're here now. Thank you so much, and I'm also really happy that you will stay with us for an entire year.
Thank you.
This is great.
Thank
I
you for
wanted to
having
mention
me.
it. So, you, in your talk, you mentioned several names of so-called brilliant Western philosophers. But you didn't mention any name of your favorite brilliant women African philosophers. So I would like to ask you, like, whom, in your opinion, should we read? Like, what is your recommendation for the most important, brilliant, or your favorite ones? It doesn't even matter if they are most important. Because I love collective practices like critical storytelling, but then often we are caught, as also the student says, in like capitalist practices, and we have to produce names sometimes. We also have to invite people like you. Then we also need the name. So I wanted to ask you about that. And if you're willing to share it, I would really love to hear your story on what your mom said when you told her that you would study philosophy.
All right. Okay. Okay. I think I should start with the second question, if you don't mind. Yeah. So, interestingly, growing up, initially I wanted to be a banker. Yes. Why? Because my dad was a banker. My dad was a banker, and I look so much like him. I didn't show you his picture. I look so much like my dad. If you see my dad, it's wow. So because I was being told repeatedly that, oh, you're just like your dad. So I wanted to be like him. I wanted to study banking, to be like him, to be more like him. So later, my mom was always telling me, so after that, so I was so interested, I wanted to be a banker. Later, shortly after nursing that ambition for a while, so my mom was, at some point, my mom was saying, oh, you're always talking this. So she was calling me, she was like saying, oh, I guess you're a lawyer. So my ambition moved from wanting to be a banker to wanting to be a lawyer. So I wanted to be a lawyer at some point. So, but when I eventually chose philosophy, she was not surprised. She said, "Oh, you like to argue, so I'm not surprised. That's what philosophers do. They argue." So she wasn't really surprised that I chose philosophy, and she has been so supportive. She has supported me the whole way in everything. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm happy. Yes, so we have so many authors, so many. I'm sorry, my discussion tonight did not get to that, so I didn't mention their names, but there are so many of them. Some of them.
Your favorite three?
My favorite three. Okay, yeah, my favorite three will be Professor Sophie Oluwole, Sophie Abosede Oluwole, Aminata Dio, and also Wangari Maathai. She also. Let me leave you with those three names. Yes. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much also for these hints, and I can just support your choice for Piolivolo or Wangari Maathai, really
Yes.
authors'
Yeah.
words to read.
Yeah.
Last chance, a last question or comment, bitteschön.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask, I guess it was at least part of some questions as well, but I wanted to ask about the song and about the singing as a practice. And I asked myself if it's like created every time new, or is it like a song which will be repeated every once in a while, or is it even, for example, your grandmother also sang parts of the song, or is it individual thoughts of your mom philosophizing about anything or everything, or is it yes, is it an actual practice, or is it like repeated?
Thank you very much. Yes. Maybe I should say I would like to say both. Both. Some songs are passed down from people that composed them, maybe some generations before those who are here now. They've been passed down from one generation to another. But those songs, there are new songs that are being composed too from time to time. So it continues. There are some new songs, there are some old songs. They are all sung as long as they convey what the message that the person within the space is trying to pass across. So there are new songs and old songs. They go together.
Did your mother invent songs?
My mom sings a lot, so yes, sometimes she composes her own songs, short songs, but she's not a musician. She's not a like a regular musician. So yes, she not a regular singer, but she sings and she also composes songs.
Yeah, thank you. So I think time is up for today. Thank you so much for your presentation and introducing your co-presenter to us, your mother to us.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Vielen Dank für die Fragen. Thank you so much for your questions and comments. And now you can give your applause.